Yeah, we're all
Hey
good.
Chris,
Hey,
how's it going?
good. Thank you for agreeing to do this because I know you and I have talked before on email, but I've been a fan of yours for a really long time.
I kind of there's so much stuff comes through here, but now I'll remember you forever.
Okay.
It's very hard to keep, thank God for Kim and everybody else that keeps track of stuff because I'd be going mad if I had to do it myself. But
Right.
anyway, well, I'm glad we're doing this. This is good. Yeah, I did make a mention. I said, I said to somebody, Denise or somebody, I said, yeah, this guy's been. I think it's cool. You should, obviously they checked you out and all that stuff. So good.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. Where are you? Where in the world or country are you?
Oh, I'm in Minneapolis.
Okay, I love Minneapolis. A lot of stuff going on there now.
Right.
The summer of Minneapolis, and then some. So anyway,
That's pretty exciting that you have a documentary coming up about your life because I didn't even know about that until recently.
yeah, it's hasn't been that publicized, but we started. I mean, the director Kevin Wells and producers Jordan McCaig and Todd Forrest have been, putting it together. They came and saw me in Manchester when I was touring the UK back in October,
Okay.
and we, I knew we were going to meet, and so we ended up having a chat, and then we furthered that later on after I got off tour, and I just loved where they were coming from. They're brilliant, you know, minds and filmmakers, and it was just the right fit. And they really knew and know how to tell the story properly. And been a lot of digging up the archives on my part, but
Right.
giving them old videos and photos and all that stuff. But we went over to film a bit in mid-February, and then I did a live performance in Bathgate, Scotland, whereby they filmed that performance, and I got ill. So it was right around COVID beginnings, and but I didn't get that. And yeah, I was pretty much worn when we were doing that week and a half of filming over there. But they got a lot of stuff, they got as much stuff as they could get during that time, and then they'll come over here when they can to interview the likes of a lot of different people over here that I've worked with, that being in the film and television world, and
Mhm.
as well as obviously the music world of people I've worked with here.
Mm. Yeah, what I primarily wanted to focus on were things that you probably haven't been asked before or not much at all. So going back, your very first recording in the industry professionally was with that band Strangers.
Yeah, that really was. I wouldn't say it was a professional breakthrough, but it was certainly a band that it was probably my first band, and we went through different. You got to remember, I had come over from England, and my dad had got a job in the Midwest, Wichita, Kansas, to be specific. So I know a bit about the Midwest. I got to know a bit about the Midwest, but I was sort of like this English guy that was just
Mhm.
very young and got into a band of guys much older than me, but I happened to have the skills at 13 years of age, and I was tall, so I was able to cut it with my voice and you know decent rhythm guitar player at that point. But we didn't really make any. We basically did what we could then, and then as time went on, I was in various other bands until I put this band together called Gerard,
Mhm.
and which that was the first breakthrough as far as having a professional record out, which was it was an album produced by James William Guercio, who was the producer of the band Chicago.
Right.
And he, produced, Paul McCartney's Ram album and many other artists. But he had a studio called Caribou, and we ended up recording this particular band that I put together in Colorado, in Boulder specifically. We were playing all over the state, and he came one night to see us on a university and campus. We had played, and just loved my music, my songs, and the whole band. It was a 10-piece band, mind you. Had horns and two female backing vocals, and it was very diversified, black and white, and it was just the record. Unfortunately, wasn't completely to my liking. It came out. It became more slick. Where we were more of a, I don't know. There was a bit of overtones of Bowie and just stuff that was a little bit more edgier than what the record came out to be. But hey, you know what? Have no regrets. It was a good experience.
That's cool, yeah, because I listened to that one too, and I was curious about the second album you guys recorded. That was just
Pardon me?
The second album that you guys recorded called Row.
That is a Wikipedia mishap because we never recorded in a second album. I don't know yet to be cleared up, but that's been asked of me so many times. And in the documentary, we're actually making a big mock about it, so it's kind of funny. But there was never a second album made by that band. However, certain band members of that group followed me out to LA, whereby I got into making what would be in the Blue Rue album. Which was a far more, by that point I was more experienced at producing. Shortly before that, I got my first gig within a year I was out here. Jerry Bruckheimer hired me to write and sing songs for a movie called Defiance.
Right,
Which basically, and there's a real story behind that is, he wanted kind of a Bruce Springsteen, Bob Seger kind of tough guy vocal. And so when I made the demos, I made them in that kind of way. I have this ability to make my voice sound different.
Right.
I can kind of, it has its attributes in that if I'm writing a song for a certain artist, I can kind of go there and sound like that person. And it's kind of like method acting, It's like being an actor playing a role. So I thought they were just going to go get some, big artists to sing the song. Certainly not Bruce or Bob Seger. But I was making the demos. They approved all the songs, and I said, "Well, who's going to sing these songs?" And they approved my budget, and I said, "You are." And I'm going like, "You don't understand. I was doing this voice to get the point across." And they said, "Well, it sounds good to us." So we ended up, I ended up singing all 5 tracks on that movie soundtrack. And unfortunately, they didn't put an album soundtrack out at the time. The movie, for being what it was, did fairly decent that year that came out. But it was, again, another good experience. It certainly paid and paved my way into the business, of filmmaking and stuff like that. But then I was already starting to write that Blue Rue album at that time.
Because right before the Blue Rue album, there was I know you played on Max Gronenthal's album.
Yeah, the famous Max Carl now.
Yep.
If you've done your research. Yeah, Max was a friend of mine actually back in Boulder. We had met and we had worked together, and he had just gotten a record deal at that time. And so he was bringing in his friends to sing backing vocals. Michael McDonald, I think, was singing backing vocals, and Kenny Loggins. And then he asked if I'd come over and do some singing on it, and I did. And yeah, it was a good album. Max is an incredibly talented singer, songwriter, and obviously he's the lead singer of Grand Funk Railroad now. So
right. Then at that same time, another movie that you did a song for was, it was in Thorpe and it was in Hard Bodies, but Hello, Hello.
Yeah, that was one of the songs I was toying with for my Blue Rue album, but it was just a little too pop, and I kind of just said, no, this isn't the flavor for what I wanted. I definitely, it was an experiment really at that time. I was writing a few things to see what would work, and it was just the same thing that happened with the song "Is That You" that Kiss ended up recording. It just didn't quite, it was trying different styles out, it's trying different directions out to make that album, be the kind of album I wanted to make, edgier. But yeah, Hello, Hello went in Hard Bodies. That's right. It was in some other movie too, and I can't remember what it was. Not,
It was in Hard Bodies.
yeah, there was some other film though that song that went into. I can't remember. It wasn't Porky's. It was some. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We can look it up later.
And then I wanted to add to that your original version, your demo of "Is That You" is one of my favorite songs.
Oh, really? Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Kiss's version sounds really good as well.
Yeah, I mean, they made it Kiss.
Right. Do you
Yeah, it was
remember?
kind of weird when I wrote that song. I was writing, their producer at the time was a guy named Vinny Poncia,
Mhm.
who was producing the Unmasked album, and he wanted to produce what would be the Blue Roo album at the time. And so, as producers do, I was just playing him a bunch of my songs, and he said, "Play me everything you got," So I started playing him everything. And he said, "Wow, that's a hit song." And I said, "Yeah, but I don't think it's really working in the vision of what I have for this Blue Roo album."
Right.
So what I did, or what he did rather, is asked me, would I mind if he played it for Kiss? And I thought that was a bit daft, in that why would they write their own songs, And he said, "Well, they need a hit, and we're almost done with the album." So he played it for them, and they loved it, and they agreed to record it. And much to my surprise, And I remember when we had answer machines back in the day. Paul and Gene left me a message on the machine, playing their version of the song over the phone to me, just saying, "This is amazing. Thank you so much," and all that. But yeah, it was cool. It was cool to have a song covered by Kiss. I think it could have been my first cover, actually. Maybe it's the second. Can't remember. It was around that period of time when I remember a band called Tavares. Tavares actually cut my song from Defiance, Bad Times. They did an R&B version of that, which my version was kind of R&B, come to think of it, in the movie, but a little bit more edgier. So.
Yeah, and I know there's an interesting story from what inspired you to write. There's an interesting story from what inspired you to write "Is That You?"
Yeah, that was a period of time I was on the road, and it was kind of around the Gerard period that I thought of the idea sort of came from that, and I think I went back up to the hotel and wrote a bit of the verse. It was just the leather, dominatrix in the lobby, or rather in the bar of the hotel. She was, it was pretty funny. But it wasn't what I was into. So I just said, "Thanks for the compliment. I think I'll go out and write a song about it."
Yeah, that's great. And then also right before the Blue Roo album, there was you wrote a song for Ron Dante, and there was one more. Oh yeah, Jay Ferguson.
Yeah, I wrote a song for Jay Ferguson. Who was the other person, did you say?
Ron Dante.
I don't recall that. I do recall writing a song for Jay Ferguson, a song called "Falling in the Heart of Your Love," or "Falling," I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and Jay, what a lovely guy. He just a really nice guy. He was in a band called Spirit back in the day. And when I was a kid, I used to love that band.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a great guy. That was that song was kind of written around the same period, right after the Gerard band split up. And I was going in the direction of Blue Roo. So that could have easily, that song. And then again, it was another thing where it just was a little bit too, I don't know, it kind of felt like a Fleetwood Mac song or something to me. You can go your own way or whatever. So I just didn't think it was going to work on the Blue Roo album,
So how did it, when you got the band Kid Lightning together, how did that come about? Because I know a lot of those guys played on a lot of LA albums that I also enjoy too.
Mm-hmm. Well, Gary Malaber was the first. When I moved to LA, I had already met him. He was the drummer in the Steve Miller Band,
Right.
and he was pretty. He did all the earlier Steve Miller records. "Fly Like an Eagle." I mean, all his hits he was on, I think up to Abracadabra, and then he wasn't no longer in the band. But anyway, long story short, I knew Gary, and he and I really got on well, and I had asked him to play on, I thought he was a fantastic drummer, so I brought him in on sessions that I was doing. I think I brought him in on the Defiance album, actually, to play drums on that album.
Right.
Yeah, and that was, and then one thing led to another, and I was putting a band together, and I said, "You want to be in the band?" And I said, "What's your story with Steve?" Meaning Steve Miller. He said, "Well, Steve doesn't really want to go on the road, and I really want to do something fresh and new, and I'd love to be in your band." And I said, "What I want to do is I want to call the band something." I said, "I don't know what it's going to be called yet." So I had met Kenny Lewis, the bass player, through somebody, and I thought he was a really good bass player, and I brought him in, actually played on the Defiance album as well. And the band was sort of organically coming together that way. And then a couple of the guys from the Gerard band, Al Campbell, who was the keyboard player, and Stephen Sykes, who was the guitar player, happened to have followed me out to LA. And we were all kind of jamming at Gary's Garage in LA. And it just seemed to come together really nicely. And there was another bloke named John Massaro who ended up being in the Steve Miller band later, as did Kenny Lewis, who's still with Steve Miller. So it just started coming together, and I was writing, I'd pretty much written all the songs at that point, and we just started booking gigs and going out and playing. And before you knew it, record companies were coming. My manager had all these record labels pounding at his door. We were playing all the hot spots in LA, Madame Wong's, and God, I can't even remember half the clubs we played. But it was we were getting a really good following, and then we, had to make the choice of which label to go with, and we went with Columbia Records, the ARC label, which Maurice White of Earth, Wind and Fire and Bob Cavallo, managers of Earth, Wind and Fire, and Prince, basically started. And it seemed like big fan of Earth, Wind and Fire, but it was a tough one because David Geffen, who I was, knew he was a good music guy. And so the decision was we went with Columbia at that time through ARC Records.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, if you got the deal by playing gigs or if Erwin Mazer just helped you.
Erwin Mazer, my manager at the time, to his credit, he was basically, booking gigs and doing, he was used to that because he was Billy Joel's manager, so he knew the ropes and what have you. And so we ended up just making it, it became, we were gigging like crazy everywhere we could. And it was just a good way to really get tight and be in front of an audience for a year. And before you knew it, that's, we were, doing residencies at a lot of these clubs because we had, demand. And, the unfortunate thing was we went to we made the record, and it was fun making the record. And it was also disappointing when the record came out, because what had happened at that time was there was this, what's called federal investigation on payola, and which they were busting all the record labels. And so the music business went in the dumps for a while there, as did my album. But it was getting it was getting play, and there was just, there was a sense that something was going on with it. And we went out and started, we could have done a lot more touring, honestly. And I don't know, I just got so disappointed in it. I just basically at one point, we attempted to make another record for Columbia, and I just said, sod off, it's just, I couldn't be bothered. The band was kind of losing it had lost the momentum because so much had been put into the first album, and the disappointment of that not happening,
Right.
But I just went back into making music for movies and started to do more of that again. And just was trying to figure out what my next move was. Gary went back to playing with Steve Miller, and as did Kenny Lewis and John Massaro, who joined the Steve Miller band. So everybody had to get a gig, you know.
Right. I was going to ask what your personal favorite songs are on the album too.
On which album?
The Blue Roo album.
Blue Roo?
Yep.
Oh my God. I like Run Into Your Shadow, and Gone Tomorrow was a fun, you know, kind of reggae-ish rock thing, you know. And yeah, I think those are two of my favorite songs on that album, you know. It was the first, you know, the cool thing about producing that record was just to get it, trying to focus on a direction, you know. And I was a big fan at the time of punk and all things that were just going on musically. It was a great time with music, you know. I mean, whatever you want to call it, new wave or whatever. But I was just trying to carve my own thing that I wanted to, you know, always like left of center kind of stuff, but and with a sense of, you know, pop factor to it, you know. So, but yeah, you know, it's unfortunate that the album, you know, I mean, things could have picked up a bit, but I went on to do another record, and that was basically just, you know, the Kid Lightning thing was over, and even though I used those guys on a couple of tracks on what would be the next album.
Right. Yeah. So going into that, is there much of a story with No Looking Back?
Well, the story was, you know, Irving Azoff, who was the record label guy, who was manager of the Eagles and Steely Dan at the time, he was already he was bidding in round one on the Blue Roo album. And I always liked, and so he wanted to, he approached me about myself and Erwin Mazer, my manager, about making a new album. And so I cut a bunch of demos, and he just was, one of them being Look in Your Eyes, which went in the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Yep.
Which, so I just started make some demos. He said, let's go make a record. You know, he was, you know, so I wanted to have a producer, and Jimmy Iovine was really keen on producing the record, but Jimmy was so in demand at that time. I mean, it was like wait 3 years, and, you know, but he was very helpful in helping me focus the album. And I brought in a guy named Michael Austin to co-produce the album. Michael was head of A&R at Warner Brothers. And I don't think he was the head of A&R at the time, but he was, you know, he had good taste. He signed Christopher Cross. He was very, and a bunch of other artists over there. He was very involved with Michael McDonald at the time. But he also had a good sense of, you know, I liked that he understood the edginess of what I wanted to create as well.
Right.
You know, and so we made that album, and it kind of came out, and it got lost, if you will, and it got pretty good critical acclaim, if I recall. And at that point, I was starting to get more disappointed about, well, what's going on with my career? And then that's sort of around that time, I sort of felt like it was time for a management change, or I needed to move. Right? So I decided to move back to New York.
Okay.
But not much touring happened around that album, and unfortunately, because we had a good band. A couple of the guys from Kid Lightning were still in the band. I think I'm trying to remember. We added a guy named Jimmy Hunter and a guy named Bobby Giannetti, two guys from Detroit, really good rhythm section. And oh my God, who was the guitar player? He was with Tina Turner, Paul something or another. He really good guitar player. He was in the band for a while. But again, you know, it was short-lived because I don't know where all the tour money went, but it didn't go to us.
Right. And then at that same time the album was happening, you were meeting so much with different directors and film people.
Yeah, a lot of those people started to approach me because they had seen previous work, you know, heard, you know, that I was the guy to go to for those, you know, me and several other people, by the way. But, you know, it was just, I had gotten a reputation for being able to really write that quintessential song or songs for films. So, right. You know, so I got into that world quite a bit at that time. And then again, of course, I was writing songs for other artists as well. So kind of like, put the
Oh,
artist thing aside for just a minute. I was just so burnt out from all the hard work of those
yeah.
first two albums that I just needed a break. And I really needed a break from LA. And every time I would go to New York, I just felt like this is my home. This is where I want to be. And right after, about a year after the No Looking Back album, I basically moved back to New York in '84.
And then 85, 86, then you had songs that were recorded by the Spinners, the Temptations, and
Yeah,
Carly Simon.
I went into my chameleon stage. I always loved that Philadelphia stuff. I didn't really write those songs for the Spinners. I just basically went into that, white, blue-eyed soul R&B thing that I was which I always loved. And I ended up, there was an artist who sang the demos who was really good, and I really believed in him. I got him in the movie Streets of Fire, doing I can't remember the song now, but anyway, it was a hit song too. God, it all slips by. I Could Dream About You. Sorry.
Oh,
So
yeah.
anyway, yeah. So I really thought he was going to blow up, and he didn't quite have. I think there was some problems there, but great guy, great vocalist. And then those songs were just kind of like, it never happened. He never made his album. So when I went back to New York, the head of A&R, Jerry Greenberg, who signed me to Atlantic, said to me, he said, "Hey, you have maybe songs for the Spinners?" And I said, "Really?" I said, "I think I do." And he said, "Because we're making a new album with them, be something to bring their career back around." So I played them, 3 songs that I'd written for this particular artist that were in that kind of Philly vein, and they loved them. And I just said, "Look, got to do it. Would you go in and produce?" And I said, "Wow, produce them as well?" I mean, that was pretty unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I was having a field day at that. Here's this guy with half my hair on this side and shaved on the other, and they who is this skinny guy? What, you wrote this stuff,
Right.
And but we got on really well. It was such having those voices, teaching them their parts, sitting around the piano, was a surreal experience. So we made that album, and it was a kind of a, on the R&B tip, it was a pretty successful little album. And I think I wrote like 4 or 5 songs on it, wrote and produced.
Did
At the same
you?
time, I was making my Foreign Papers album too.
Yeah. Did you also meet in person with Carly for the Give Me All Night, or how did that come about?
She had heard my Foreign Papers album through the guy that was engineering and producing her album, getting ready to anyway. And she asked him, this guy, his name's Frank Filippetti, and he mixed my Foreign Papers album. And so she asked him if anybody he knew that got really fresh, good songs, and who she might want to meet. And he said, "Yeah, I just worked with this guy. Take this album home and listen to it." She freaked over the album. She loved it. So she rang me up and asked me if I'd write her some songs or if I would write with her. So we got together at my apartment in New York, and we ended up, writing a few songs together. And then Give Me All Night became the one. I remember when she left, I just sat down at the piano. I kind of, just being around her, got the vibe. I said, "Oh, I can write You're So Vain" again, and it was kind of a vibe of that. I was kind of thinking it'd be great to get that kind of vibe, but for her again. So
Right.
Anyway, did that. She loved it. She came to my apartment, sang the demo, gave it to the record label, Clive Davis, who was, had signed her, and it became the first single, like this top 5 record at the time. And I think it came out the same year that Cry Little Sister, rather Lost Boys came out. I remember it was simultaneously happening in that month. It's 87. Yeah, summer of 87.
And you and going to Cry Little Sister, you said that you entirely based, you wrote the whole song based off the script, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was the first time I'd ever done that. Before that, I'd already been given the privilege of having a rough cut to look at of the film
Hmm.
and get a vibe that way to sort of see how the characters were working. And
Right.
I just didn't get to see the film because they were filming it. And Joel Schumacher said, "Would you read the script and maybe you'll come up with some ideas of some inspiration?" And I said, "Okay." So I did, and read the script, thought it was bang on, good.
Hmm.
And then I went away, and the next morning after reading, I started to write Cry Little Sister. And before you knew it, song was practically writing itself. I got in the cab, went to my studio, and finally came up with the chorus. And it was just one of those things where I just kept having this, so my whole idea of what the movie looked like in my head, which it did nothing. Didn't look anything. When I finally got to see the film, I was blown away. Well, they told me how amazing the demo was, how it was working throughout the entire film, and because
Right.
Joe asked me to write a theme song to the film, and I don't know if I would have written that song if I would have seen the film, because it was completely different looking film feel to it's like reading a book. When you read a book, you get images in your head about what the people look like and what have you, or a novel.
Right.
And so it was a bit like me creating characters in my own head.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me since the song is way more darker and sensual than the movie is, obviously.
That's why it worked.
Yeah.
Because it added that layer of sensuality. And I'm glad you keyed in on that, because I've always looked at that. It has its darkness, but it's also got this very, openness about the light, if you will. And when it goes into that chorus, even though I maintain the edge with it, but it's always been a sensual, song to me.
Mhm. And you said that,
Right.
yeah. See, and you said prior to writing Cry Little Sister that every other time that you wrote a song for film that you got the chance to view a cut of the movie first.
Yeah, always, generally speaking, yeah. Every time they would either show me a portion of the film, where they wanted to film, where they wanted the song. Like, I remember All the Right Moves. They had Prince's little red Corvette temped into the scene in the movie, and they couldn't afford the $1 million that Prince wanted they didn't have it in the budget that he wanted for it. It worked really well. So I basically said, so I looked at it and, came up with something that had a bit of that vibe. And they ended up loving that. And so, but I got to look at the film, and I just had, when I took I kind of think they let me take a VHS home of it without the sound, because I didn't want to hear the Prince song. And I just ended up looking at it and writing it. And I think that's how I did it.
Mm-hmm.
They would do that sometimes, just give you, the side of paper, you're not going to release it anywhere, and just to take it home and just to get a vibe on it. Yeah.
Right. Did you also, this is more probably in the focused on the early part of the 80s, but when you were writing songs for film, did you ever get any direction as to how people wanted you to sing it? Or was that all up to you?
It was generally up to me.
Okay.
I don't, the only thing that they would do is they give you templates of what's, kind of vibe. With the case of like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, the song was already written and Cameron Crowe loved it. And for this particular scene with by the pool, to Jennifer Jason Leigh, and, right before they go into the pool and get it on and all that stuff. And so that was just an already written song. I mean, there's been times where, they have a temp, what's called a temp in there, like we mentioned the little red Corvette temp in All the Right Moves. And, but generally speaking, I've pretty much been able to just, create a vibe for it, or I'll just be me, which is more.
Because one thing I find really cool about you that I haven't experienced it with any other musical artists that I'm a fan of is that, like what you mentioned earlier about being able to have your voice be, you know, the gruff rock that you were doing with like Blue Rue and Is That You and the Defiant songs, and then a different voice for your No Looking Back and the songs for the other movies in the same decade.
Yeah, the No Looking Back vocal was pretty much focused on my voice being that one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that sort of, I felt comfortable. I knew where I was at that point. And that sort of got found it in the Blue Rue album. I was, you know, capturing that. You know?
Mm-hmm.
And in Foreign Papers, it kind of it's continued on, you know, yeah, kept my star was happening. And it was just, I just got so fed up with just record label, you know, not the record labels, not that they were bad people. It's just, I was a victim of just, I don't say victim. I was just, the circumstances were what they were. It's just, you know, great records. And I'm not the only one it happens to, you know,
Mm-hmm.
but it just, but I have no regrets. I got more successful during the years. Lost Boys came out, but I didn't know I was being successful because that movie my song from that movie soundtrack was just gaining heat everywhere. And I basically was just living in New York at that time, just writing, doing some commercials, just doing, you know, working on new songs for myself that never, you know, wasn't really looking for a record deal at the time. And, but I continued to write, and, you know, there's a lot of the songs from that period of the early, you know, then Roger Daltrey. Well, Robert Plant approached me to write with him.
Wow.
That was about 89, was it? No, 88. Yeah, somewhere like 88, 89. And because he got turned on to me via his daughter, who is a big fan of Cry Little Sister.
Wow.
And he loved it. And then he got a hold of me personally, and then we ended up getting together. I flew over to England, and I was, you know, and yeah, it was a great guy. And you know, the Who and Zeppelin are managed by the same management organization. And Roger had been hearing what I was doing with Robert Plant and asked me if I'd write him some songs. But with Roger, I ended up producing the entire album, which was called Rocks in the Head, which is an album that came out. And interesting enough, I was writing songs for myself at that time that, you know, songs like Who's Gonna Walk on Water and Mirror, Mirror, the songs that went on that album. But he loved them. He said, and I just said, what the hell? What better way, you know, to let these songs go, but to have one of the best rock singers in the world sing them, you know?
Right.
So it was a fun project. We started recording in 1991, and I got Roger to write with me as well, which was kind of the first time he really delved into serious writing. So we co-wrote about 4 songs, and the rest of the album I wrote by myself.
So was everything that you collaborated with Robert Plant on, was that still just never released?
Never released. And it was just, you know, the direction of things where he was still trying to find a direction of what he wanted to do. I think it was around the Now and Zen period. And, you know, I think the things I was doing with him were a bit more, they were forward thinking, but they had Zeppelin overtones. And I think that might have been something he wanted to escape. You know, he's never said that to me, but he loved what we were working on, you know. And yeah, we remained friends after that. And but it was great. You know, I'm glad it worked out the way it did, because I got, you know, a really good friend out of Roger by the amount of time that we worked together. You know,
right?
It became very close as friends.
Yeah.
So it was he passing me on to Roger was a good thing.
Yeah, that's really cool, because that's something I'd never known about before you and Robert, I mean, until now.
Yeah, he was sort of, very much instrumental in me bringing me back to my roots. We were born in the same town of Birmingham, England, too.
Oh, yeah.
So we had that in common. Well, he didn't know that, but I knew where he was. I knew he was from there. And then, much to his surprise, when we got together, I told him, yeah, and he's from Wolverhampton, which is the area I lived in, and literally his house would have been about a 5-minute walk from me.
Oh.
We didn't, I mean, he's older than me, but still, we were there at the same time. Yeah.
That's crazy. So one thing I was also wondering that on the subject of collaborations, did you ever work with other really big songwriters in that time period, like Desmond Child or Holly Knight or?
No, I knew them all. They were all sort of doing their own thing. Desmond would write with Bon Jovi, of course, and do certain co-writes, but we were all kind of solo about what we did. Kind of all knew, Diane Warren, the very young Diane Warren at that time was very solo. I mean, she did not want to be an artist. She just wanted to write hit songs for other people. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Desmond was in New York at that time. Maybe going back and forth. Holly Knight, the same thing. And I think I met Holly. Holly Knight and I met somewhere. I can't remember where it was. It could have been at a Comic-Con convention that I was performing at. I think. I'm not sure. But anyway, but we had known of each other. Yeah, right. So she's a fantastic songwriter.
So when you were in LA earlier in the 80s, did you ever encounter Billy Steinberg and Tom Kelly?
Yeah. They were a team, and they really built their, little stable as a team, mm-hmm. collaborators. And they didn't, and, mad respect for them. They were, both came out of being in bands, and I think they were in a band together in the 70s or something like that. So, yeah. I saw somewhere you interviewed them, right?
Yeah, Billy was the first person I interviewed.
Right, that's right. I think I saw that on the sheet.
Yeah, it was. And then just the other day, I interviewed Tommy Farragher.
Oh yeah.
Because I know he was doing all that stuff in LA at the same time too, with 20th Century Fox and writing for film and everything.
Yeah, that's right.
So then, all throughout the 90s, you pretty consistently worked on lots of TV shows and other movies.
Yeah, a lot of that through the 90s was basically, again, just trying to find myself. And I just thought at that point, hip hop was really banging, and I kind of went down that road and started getting a notoriety in the hip hop world for coming up with great tracks and stuff like that. So Ice Cube at one point was making a movie called The Players Club, and the music supervisor reached out to me, see if I'd come up with something for the theme to that movie. And I was in New York at the time, just getting ready to move to LA because I'd signed with the company DreamWorks, and I was going to make an album. Finally getting into a phase where I was going to make an album, a new album for myself, which became G-Tom Mac. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote this track song called Money Can't Buy the Love. And it was, Cube loved it, and it opened up the movie. So it was one of those things, spending my time in the trenches of hip hop, paid off in that movie. And it was a cool little movie, cool little soundtrack. I think it came out in 1997, something like that. And things were just starting to happen at that point. Wrote, Chasing Amy, the movie, did a song for that movie. And the TV world, one of the things in coming out here was the TV world was starting to blow up a bit, where songs were becoming more prevalent in TV.
Right.
And it had a real good run with, when I signed with DreamWorks, a lot of the songs from that G-Tom Mac album went on to be in these big TV shows, from Roswell to, Scrubs,
Yep.
There were so many of them at one point. I was going like, wow, not that I'm, it wasn't that big of a TV watcher back then, but it was, certainly the royalties were coming in. I'm going, wow, this is unbelievable how many TV shows that my songs have been licensed for.
Right. So who came up with the idea then to do a musical of the Lost Boys with your music?
I did. I thought it just might work, and spent 5 years working on it, and we were getting it to a good place, and then it's kind of like, oh my God, this is so much work went into writing it, and keeping all the characters, trying to tell a deeper backstory to it, and
right.
Not trying to, I did. And so we were moving along with it, and then, the pandemic happened. So we, everything came to a halt. We were hoping to, so we'll see what goes on with it. Kind of have to just see what maybe 2022 brings. So these things aren't easy. It's a lot of hard work doing musicals. You got so much, and you've got the bureaucracy of everything, and then but I just do what I do, create. And but the soundtrack's available. It's on Spotify. You stream it on Spotify. You can download it if you wish. And I'm quite proud. It's called A Lost Boy's Story. Lost Boy's Story.
I've seen YouTube videos at conventions back a little bit. Weren't you friends with Corey Haim?
Well, Corey, I wasn't friends. I mean, I didn't really know any of the Lost Boys characters, or rather, stars, until I did one of these horror cons in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It had to be about 2009, and that's when I met Corey Haim and Corey Feldman and all the other guys, Billy Wirth, Jameson Newlander, Brooke McCarter, Chance Corbett, and we all became really, we were hanging out, and it was a good get together, because they'd never met me, and I'd never met them, because I wasn't even, around that time, actually, when the premiere of the film happened, I was in England. So, I didn't meet them then, and there was no real reason to meet them later, really. And I was living in New York, and they were all living in LA. But so it was quite a union in getting with them, and we did many of them. But Corey was a good kid, good grown-up kid at that point, and tried to help him a bit, get him sorted out. But he was such a good-hearted kid. It was so horrific to see that he had to pass on like he did,
Right. So then, with the musical, were those, when you were writing songs for those, were you just doing what you always do, or were you kind of drawing inspiration from anywhere else? Because I know there's songwriters like Jim Steinman who are naturally their songs are naturally really theatrical and have this huge natural story behind it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sort of natural about going, that it was always told to me, you should write musicals, because even in the Gerard album, people looked at these songs kind of being very theatrical.
Yeah.
I'd always thought about doing it. I studied musical theater, so I do know I didn't walk into it blindly,
Okay.
But yeah, I know what you mean. Jim Steinman has that very bravado, everything's grandiose.
Yeah.
And but I can go there. It takes the time to really sit down and go there and really make these things make the songs be larger than life. And I think there was the hard part in coming up with the music was to get it to have that grandiose thing, but also have a bit of an edge, but also bring a little bit more pop to the musical,
Right.
and also have a bit of a retro factor to it. You can kind of hear that in some of the songs, like "Sleep All Day, Party All Night." It's almost like a Prince song,
Yep.
And you know, in a musical, theatrical way. And then there's, you know, Long Hot Summer, which is pretty much a song you kind of hear on the radio, but it's a great, but it's also, I said, why not have that element of pop going on in musical theater? There are no, just as long as you have enough melody and enough of a statement, you know, going on that really applies itself to the theatrics and the musicality, the musical factor to the story.
Right.
So, you know, and there were, you know, the song "Be One of Us," it's a little bit kind of Dave Matthews meets Peter Gabriel, but it's, but again, it works, you know, it's got its own place. And I think the thing about Hamilton was it did that kind of thing too. They incorporated this incredible hip hop feel to the story. And yes, it was breaking grounds with hip hop in the musical, you know, musical field, but it was true to the hip hop world, you know, just as I tried to be true to the sort of pop rock world, if you will, on my songs that I wrote for the musical.
Yeah, because I actually, once I got older and I grew to appreciate songwriting more and your songwriting and your albums, and I always thought that it would be really amazing and cool if you kind of build a whole album or play or something around Cry Little Sister and had other similar songs like it, because
well, you know, that was where I was going originally. I was going to build, I was not too many people know that I was originally going, because the rights factor would have been far more easier. The bureaucracy that goes on when you've got the rights to work with, and, you know, meaning like the amount of people that have to sign off on stuff, it's a nightmare.
Right.
And you know, but I may do that at some point because I wrote a badass story on the whole thing around Cry Little Sister,
right.
Which really, yeah, in some ways it's on par with what I did for Lost Voice. In a lot of ways, it actually. It just, there was an element to it when I started working on, that was about 10 years ago. And, you know, there were people already lining up going, look, they put their money into that, you know? So you never know. It could be a great offshoot at some point.
Back when you recorded that song and that song was on the soundtrack and everything, did you ever have any idea as to, wow, this will blow up and people will still be talking about it 30 years later?
No, I actually thought that it would just, first of all, I didn't think it would even make it in the movie. I really did. I thought it was just, you know, because Joel said to me, just be free with it. And I said, okay. And I just got free with it. And I made it be what I wanted. I really almost didn't care at that point because I was just sort of like, I felt free anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like, you know, it was just something, I felt free in a powerful way writing that. And it became, but then even after that, when it got accepted into the film, and when he just was, you know, he basically said to me, you know, you're the voice of this movie, you know, without this song, you know, and I was going like, come on. And then when after a while, it kind of sunk in. I said, yeah, it is a character within its own self, within the film, you know? And so, yeah, thanks to Joel. I mean, giving me free license to do what I want. He didn't give me any guidance, didn't say, he just said, do what you do, but feel free. And so that's how that happened. And I did, but again, to answer your question, 30 years, some years later, I would never imagine that it had the ride it did. And, you know, I didn't know the kind of ride it was having before the internet and before all things became of the world we now know.
Right.
Because it was, you know, I could have gone out. I mean, I don't know if, I think what would have happened if I was to have gone out on the road when Cry Little Sister was a movie soundtrack, probably would have been, things probably would, but I had no idea. At that point, I was just fed up with it all. I had just made the Foreign Papers album. I couldn't be bothered with it, you know, I was loving my life in New York, living in Greenwich Village, and, you know, so it was just sort of, you know, it was bubbling and boiling without me even knowing. I mean, royalty checks were coming in like crazy, you know.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just about you know, people were buying the album, and there were, you know, and Excess was on that soundtrack, Roger Daltrey, who I didn't even know at the time.
Yep.
And so there were all these other artists, you know, Echo and the Bunnymen, you know. So I figured the the soundtrack was selling because of all the other artists. But the people to this day say, you know, I bought the album just for Cry Little Sister. You know?
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how it's probably, you know, in retrospect, it was sort of the epitome of all the things that didn't happen in the past. That song happening brought a lot of life to the music that I'm currently doing and the following that I have by what I'm doing, you know. And you know, a lot of people don't even know about those past albums. We're re-releasing them. Blue Roo is going to get a good push to be released. They're going to do vinyl with that. So they're all going to get re-released. And a lot of it's going to lead up to the documentary, because we're going to put an anthology together of all the songs on, you know, from those particular earlier albums.
Yep.
But it'll be great having the actual full-on albums in vinyl form for people to buy once they see the documentary too, because they cover a lot of, obviously we're doing an interview here, but they cover so much more in-depthly with my career and my life going way back. And just, there's a lot of weird, they've been able to capture a lot of really cool and interesting things. You should interview those guys. They'd be a great interview. There's a trailer coming out of this documentary. I think it's going to drop in around the 1st of October.
Okay.
But yeah, you know, I mean, I think they'd be into doing it. You know, they're going to be doing a bunch of press, I know, coming up soon. But this, you know, we've been set back on the documentary because they've been unable to, you know, they've been able to do a lot of things in England, you know, without me being there.
Right.
That they've shot, and they've done some interviews and things like that. And yeah, it's been difficult because a lot of my world has been in America.
Yep. I guess one of the last things I can ask you is just something I always like to ask musicians I've been interviewing lately is if, like, at that time when you were gigging around with Kid Lightning in LA, do you have any interesting stories about other musicians? Or?
Yeah, I have a lot. I have a lot of interesting stories, but I don't think I can really get into that in an interview. Oh man, we were crazy, you know. I mean, you know, just sort of semi-debauchery that used to go on, and just, you know, we'd be in LA and I'll tell you one, we'd rent a hotel and we'd have all these girls come over. We just would party and just have fun. I think we've just gotten a record deal. I mean, there's so many stories. You know, I mean, yeah, on the road stories. God, I can't even get into that. But they were unique stories. But I do talk about them in the documentary.
Okay.
But, you know, I do remember we just decided to go to, what was it, Century City, and rent the Century Plaza a suite because we just got our deal. And we just partied with these, it was just like, it wasn't like, okay, we want to get shagged, you know. It was really just a fun night of about 20 of us, just like hanging out, doing what you do when you have a, you know, so it was sort of a congratulating ourselves party, but it didn't end until 8:30 in the morning. So it was one of those things. But that's what you do in your 20s.
Right.
And 30s.
So just going off of that quick, you guys would have been, there have been days, I'm sure, that were you guys ever on the same bill with like Motley Crue? And because all those hair bands were blowing up at that time in LA.
Yeah, they were, you know, I met, the interesting thing is that I met we hung out with those guys. I got to know Tommy Lee, and I was also, what's her name, the blonde haired metal girl, I can't remember her name now. She did a duet with Ozzy Osbourne.
Wendy O. Williams.
No.
Oh, no, Lita Ford.
Lita Ford,
Yeah.
and she sang backing vocals on No Looking Back album. She did the backing stuff on Talking About Girls. Yeah, her and my girlfriend Christiana, at the time, did the backing vocals on, and she did something else I can't remember. But Lita was always hanging out at the studio as a recording. She's great. She was managed, I think, by my manager Erwin Mazur's partner, and but she was great. I always thought she was definitely going to blow up because she just had great chops and great voice. I mean, she had already worked it, with the Runaways at that point. So, but yeah, she was cool.
Well, thanks. This was really, really super fun for me. Been a fan since I was like 14. I'm 23 now.
Wow. Well, I'm honored, man.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I hope is this something you edit, or is this is this live? I don't know what you're doing at this point.
I always record them, and then I go over them and I upload them to YouTube and I share them everywhere.
Yeah, great. Fantastic. Well, let us know when we can take a look at it when you're done with it.
Yeah, I'll be sure to.
My headphones came out. Sorry about that. Hang on. I'm back. Anyway, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's that, your vodka? Is that your vodka?
That was water.
Just joking. Well, listen, it's nice to meet you, Chris.
Yeah, you
All
too.
the best. Power to the people in Minneapolis, okay?
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Be well. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, you
Cheers.
too.